On the night of the party, the mouth of the spinning bottle landed on Chloe. "Spill a secret," someone goaded. A blurry, drunken smile spread across her face. "I cheated," she announced. "With Julian Vance." The room went dead silent. In Ethan's hand, the beer glass he was holding suddenly cracked. Ethan killed the screen and lit a cigarette. So damn satisfying. The sharp clink of glasses, the greasy aroma of barbecue sliders, and the rising tide of his friends' booming laughter all swirled together in the cramped living room, creating a suffocating, stuffy atmosphere. Ethan leaned back into the corner of the sectional, the craft beer in his hand mostly untouched. Condensation beaded on the cold glass, leaving his fingertips damp. A deep weariness settled over him, his eyelids heavy. All he wanted was for this painfully loud get-together to be over. All right, let's get this bottle spinning." Big Mike, his face flushed red from the booze, yelled loud enough to shake the drywall. He grabbed an empty beer bottle with his thick fingers and gave it a hard spin in the center of the greasy glass coffee table. The green bottle spun in a dizzying circle, its neck wobbling like a drunk before it finally, inevitably, came to a stop, pointing directly at Chloe. "Whoa, Chloe," Big Mike hooted, wiggling his eyebrows. Your turn. Truth or dare? Or, hey, how about you just drop a bombshell on us?" Every eye in the room, fueled by alcohol and a prurient curiosity, locked onto Chloe. She'd had a lot to drink tonight. 2 unnatural splotches of red bloomed on her cheeks, and her eyes were hazy and unfocused. When she smiled, it was a slow, dazed thing, and she swayed sideways, nearly collapsing against the woman next to her. "A bombshell." She drew out the word, her voice thick and syrupy with intoxication. Her gaze drifted across the room, and then, with a look that was an unnerving mix of pride and provocation, her eyes landed on Ethan in his corner. Ethan's grip on his glass tightened, just slightly. The noisy chatter of the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating silence that hung in the air, waiting for her next words. Chloe giggled, a sound like a cat that had just cornered a canary. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and, in a breezy, almost boastful tone, enunciated each word with perfect clarity. "I cheated." The air froze. A drop of grease from the nearby snack tray sizzled on a hot plate, its sharp hiss unnaturally loud. As if that wasn't enough, Chloe tilted her chin up slightly, her red lips parting again to deliver the final, fatal blow, with Julian Vance. Crack! The sharp sound ripped through the silence, louder than the sizzle of grease. It was the glass in Ethan's hand. Unable to withstand the sudden pressure of his grip, it had fractured. Cold beer, mixed with a few drops of bright red blood, trickled down his clenched fingers and onto his dark jeans, spreading into a small, dark stain. He seemed not to feel it. His eyes were locked on the woman who was still smiling, his gaze as deep and cold as a frozen lake. A dead silence had fallen over the living room. His friends, who had been laughing and egging her on just moments before, now looked like a collection of statues, their smiles frozen, their faces masks of disbelief and awkward horror. Mouths were left hanging open. Hands holding drinks were suspended in midair. The weight of the moment was heavy enough to crush bone. The bizarre silence finally seemed to penetrate Chloe's drunken haze. She blinked her watery eyes, looking around the room as the triumphant look on her face slowly dissolved into confusion. Her gaze instinctively found Ethan's, and when she met those bottomless, ice-cold eyes, she flinched. The alcohol seemed to evaporate from her system in an instant, replaced by a creeping dread. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan looked down at the small cut on his palm from the broken glass. Blood beaded up, mixing with the cold beer. He didn't look at Chloe again, nor at anyone else. He rose to his feet, his movements unervingly steady, but a chilling aura radiated from him, causing those nearest to instinctively shrink away. He walked toward the front door. The soles of his leather shoes made heavy, rhythmic thuds against the hardwood floor, each step a hammer blow against the frozen atmosphere. He pulled the door open, and a gust of cool night air swept in, rustling his hair. Without a backward glance, he disappeared into the darkness outside, leaving behind a room full of silent people and a single, cracked, blood-stained glass on the coffee table. The door clicked shut. The sound was quiet, but it landed like a sledgehammer on Chloe's heart, shattering the last vestiges of the party's forced merriment. The color drained from her face. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. An overwhelming wave of fear and shame, cold and unforgiving, crashed over her. Ethan didn't go home. The apartment he had once called home now felt contaminated, every molecule of air thick with the stench of betrayal. He drove aimlessly through the sleeping city. He rolled the window down, and the biting wind felt like a razor against his skin, yet it did nothing to cool the block of searing ice in his chest. His phone, lying on the passenger seat, began to vibrate violently, the screen lighting up and going dark in a frantic rhythm. Chloe's name flashed over and over. He glanced at it, his expression as cold as the Siberian tundra, then reached over and held down the power button until the screen went black for good. Finally, some peace. He needed a place to go, somewhere quiet, somewhere secure, where he could put his shredded, bleeding heart on ice and think. He called his oldest friend, Leo Chun, and said only 2 words, the usual spot. Leo's spare penthouse condo, with its sweeping city views and top-tier security, became Ethan's temporary fortress. The vast floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto a glittering but cold cityscape that reflected his own expressionless face. He threw himself onto the enormous sofa, his body sinking into the cushions as a tidal wave of exhaustion hit him. But his mind was terrifyingly clear, like a high-performance computer precisely calculating a program of total destruction. Chloe and Julian Vance. He ground the names together in his mind. Julian Vance, a man he'd briefly worked with on a project, a smooth operator who carried himself with a veneer of polished charm. Ethan even remembered shaking the man's hand at Chloe's company holiday party. Julian, the husband of a colleague, had been almost obsequiously complimentary. And all along, hidden beneath that praise, was this filth. Rage burned through his veins like lava, making his fingertips tingle. But deeper than the rage was a profound sense of humiliation, of being played for an absolute fool. Ethan Hayes, a man known for being ruthless and decisive in the boardroom, had been stabbed in the back by the person closest to him. And she hadn't just stabbed him, she had ripped his dignity to shreds in front of everyone and stomped it into the ground. Damn it! A low, strangled growl escaped his throat. He snatched a heavy crystal ashtray from the coffee table, the muscles in his arm bunching, and hurled it with all his strength at the sleek, reflective surface of the 70-inch television screen. Crash! The ear-splitting shatter echoed through the cavernous living room. A shower of tiny glass fragments rained down, glinting like sharp, cold diamonds in the city lights. A spiderweb of cracks instantly covered the massive screen, a gaping black hole at its center. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. The sight of the wreckage seemed to calm the violent storm inside him, if only by a fraction. He needed to be colder, more precise. Brute force was messy. It would only drag him down into the mud with them. What he wanted was a death by 1,000 cuts. He wanted them to feel what it was like to have their lives dismantled, their reputations destroyed. He walked to the window and lit a cigarette. The red cherry glowed in the dark, illuminating his hard, statuesque profile. Once the idea of revenge took root, it grew like an invasive vine, rapidly developing a clear and methodical path. He needed an entry point, a vulnerability that would make them suffer, a starting point for their utter ruin. Julian Vance. Ethan narrowed his eyes, the smoke curling around his face. Fragments of information about the man began to assemble in his mind. Julian owned a small import-export business, Vance Imports. It had done well recently, riding a wave of favorable trade policies. He'd made some money, started driving a Porsche, and was building a name for himself in their circles. Ethan knew the type all too well. Shallow roots, a sudden rise to success, and an ego that made them careless. They always left a trail. Taxes. Ethan's fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm against the cold glass. A business of that size, dabbling in gray areas of international trade. How clean could its books possibly be? He was almost certain. He stubbed out the cigarette and walked to the home office. He opened his laptop, the screen's cold light illuminating his emotionless eyes. He logged into a heavily encrypted messaging app and found a contact named Spectre. It was an information broker he'd connected with years ago, a ghost who operated in the shadows, handling sensitive requests for a very high price and with absolute discretion. Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard, each keystroke dripping with ice. Target: Vance Imports, owner Julian Vance. I want a full workup of his company's financials for the last 3 years. Bank records, wire transfers, associated entities, especially his tax filings versus actual revenue. Focus: fraudulent invoices, tax evasion, profit shifting through shell corporations. The evidence chain must be airtight, able to withstand scrutiny. Money is no object. I want it in 3 days. Message sent. Ethan leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. In the darkness, Chloe's drunken, triumphant face from the party and Julian's smarmy, duplicitous smile flashed before him. A slow, cruel, and utterly cold smile stretched across his own lips. The game was on, and they, still basking in the afterglow of their sordid affair, had no idea. For 3 days, Ethan locked himself away in Leo's penthouse fortress, a wounded animal licking its wounds in the dark. He barely ate, barely slept. Most of his time was spent in the office, either remotely managing urgent business for his own company or simply staring out at the cold steel and glass forest of the city. The ashtray overflowed with cigarette butts, and the air grew thick with the smell of tobacco and a heavy, oppressive silence. His phone remained off. He didn't want any distractions, and he certainly didn't want to hear Chloe's belated, meaningless apologies or tearful excuses. Hearing her voice would only unleash the rage he was struggling to keep leashed. On the evening of the 3rd day, a soft chime sounded from his laptop. It was the encrypted messaging app. Ethan clicked on the notification instantly. Spectre had sent an encrypted zip file, accompanied by a short message. Package delivered. Vance Imports, Julian Vance. 3 years of financial statements, bank records, wire transfers to and from affiliated shell companies, records of fraudulent value-added tax invoices, including upstream/downstream company info and evidence of fund kickbacks, detailed calculation of evaded taxes with ScanSource documents, and a flowchart of profit-shifting pathways. Evidence chain is complete. A draft of an anonymous tip has been prepared. Upon receipt of final payment, we'll provide submission channels and operational guide. Ethan's eyes were sharp as a hawk's as he downloaded and extracted the files. The contents were meticulously organized. He clicked open several key documents, his eyes scanning them rapidly. The screen's glow cast a cold, grim light on his face. It was staggering. Julian's audacity was greater than he'd imagined. The fraudulent invoices totaled in the millions. The amount of evaded tax was astronomical. Worse, the shell corporations he'd used to shift profits were registered under the names of his relatives, leaving a trail of financial breadcrumbs so obvious it was almost insulting. Every suspicious transaction was backed up with crystal-clear bank statements and scan contracts. It was an ironclad case. Looking at the cold, hard numbers and the damning evidence, the roiling anger in Ethan's chest settled into something deeper, a cold and focused intent to kill. He picked up a burner phone, wired the substantial final payment through the untraceable offshore channel Spectre had provided, and waited. Seconds later, a new message popped up from Spectre. It was a detailed guide on how to submit the tip, listing the most effective government channels and key points to include. It even came with a pre-written template for an anonymous letter. Ethan ignored the template. He opened a new document, his fingers tapping out a message that was sharp and cold as ice. To whom it may concern, this is a formal complaint regarding significant tax fraud committed by Vance Imports, LLC, Principal, Julian Vance. Since approximately 2022, the company has engaged in a long-term scheme to willfully evade federal and state taxes through the generation of fraudulent invoices, fabrication of business contracts, and the use of affiliated shell companies to illegally shift profits. The estimated amount of evaded tax is substantial, and the conduct is particularly egregious. Supporting evidence is attached. He stated the facts calmly, without a single emotional word, yet every sentence was a dagger. He attached the compressed folder of core evidence from Spectre. For the submission, he chose the most direct and potent route, the online portal for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. In the field for informant information, he checked the box for Anonymous. His cursor hovered over the Submit button for a full 10 seconds. In that brief eternity, he saw Chloe's smug, drunken face at the party. He saw Julian's fake smile. He saw the blood dripping from his own hand as the glass shattered. All the rage, the humiliation, the searing pain of betrayal, it all coalesced into this single click. With a completely blank expression, he pressed the mouse. 3. The screen displayed a confirmation. Your information has been successfully submitted. Ethan leaned back in his chair and exhaled a long, silent breath. The office was dead quiet, save for the low hum of the computer. He took another cigarette from the pack on the desk and lit it. The red ember flared in the darkness, reflected in his bottomless eyes. There was no triumphant joy, just a cold, almost hollow sense of calm. This was only the first cut. He slowly blew out a ring of smoke, watching it twist and dissolve in the cold air. Sleep well while you can, Julian. The storm is coming. In the days that followed, Ethan became the patient hunter, lying in wait. He moved back into his apartment, their apartment, and in Chloe's presence, he was unnaturally calm. In fact, he was worse than angry. He was completely, coldly detached. Chloe was clearly terrified by the consequences of that night. For the first few days, she tried to explain, crying a river of tears, stammering about how she was drunk, how she was just joking, how it wasn't true. Ethan just watched her, his expression like that of someone observing a terrible actor, and said nothing. His silence was more crushing than any shouted accusation, and it made her excuses sound increasingly pathetic until all that was left were her helpless sobs and timid attempts to please him. She began to clumsily play the part of the atoning wife. When Ethan got home from work, she would rush to the door, take his coat, and ask in a soft, strained voice, "You're home. Was it a long day, dinner? Dinner's almost ready." She would bustle around the kitchen in an apron, trying to make his favorite dishes, but her hands shook and her mind was elsewhere. The food was either too salty or burnt. Ethan would sit at the table, stare at a plate of blackened pork chops, and take a bite without any change in his expression. It tasted of salt and ash. "How is it?" Chloe would ask, standing nearby, nervously wringing the edge of her apron, her eyes full of desperate hope. Ethan would swallow the unpalatable mouthful, put down his fork, take a sip of water, and then finally look at her. His voice was as flat as if he were discussing the weather. "It's salty and burnt." The color would drain from Chloe's face, her lips trembling as her eyes welled up again. I'll be more careful next time." "Okay," Ethan would reply, looking away and continuing to eat his plain rice. The only sounds in the dining room would be the soft clinking of silverware and Chloe's muffled, suppressed sobs. This calculated, icy routine was a form of slow torture, a dull knife sawing away at her nerves. She grew quieter, and the fear in her eyes deepened into a hollow despair. This was exactly what Ethan wanted. To let her hang, to let her guess, to let her suffer in the agony of waiting for the final judgment. Meanwhile, he kept a close watch on Julian Vance. The import-export world wasn't that large, and Ethan had his sources. Things were quiet for about 2 weeks, and then the first clap of thunder struck. An older business acquaintance, a man named Hemlock who he knew casually, cornered him at a small industry mixer. Leaning in with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face was a mixture of schadenfreude and gossipy glee. "Ethan, you hear what happened? Vance Imports, that guy, Julian Vance? His company is in deep shit." Ethan swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his expression unchanged, his tone pitched to just the right level of mild surprise. "Oh, Vance? I thought his business was doing well. What happened?" "Doing well, my ass." Hemlock scoffed. "He took a nosedive. Word is he's being investigated by the feds. IRS raid. It was a huge scene. They completely shut him down. Agents were camped out in his office for days, seized all his computers, books, records, everything. Man, you should have seen it. The look on Vance's face. He was white as a ghost." Ethan took a sip of his drink, the liquor burning a path down his throat. "That's serious. What did they find? Are you kidding? How could they not find anything?" Hemlock's eyes twinkled with malice. I heard the hole he dug is massive. Fraudulent invoices, tax evasion. He might even be facing jail time. The whole industry is buzzing. Anyone who did business with him is panicking, worried they'll get dragged down too. His company is toast. That Porsche of his, he'll be selling it to pay his legal fees. Ethan just nodded, saying nothing more, but a flicker of cold satisfaction passed deep within his eyes. The first cut had gone deep. It was a mortal wound. A few days later, more concrete news emerged. Vance Imports was hit with massive fines and back taxes, a sum so large it would instantly liquidate the company and leave Julian personally buried in debt. His corporate accounts were frozen, operations ground to a halt, and employees went unpaid. Julian was running around desperately, calling in favors, but the evidence was irrefutable. No one would touch him. The friends who had once slapped him on the back were now nowhere to be found. Ethan knew Julian's real nightmare was just beginning. And Chloe, it seemed, had also heard the news. That night, when Ethan walked through the door, the atmosphere was wrong. Chloe wasn't in the kitchen, nor did she come to greet him. She was sitting on the living room sofa, looking utterly broken. Her face was pale, her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and the phone in her hand was lit up, displaying a financial news article with a damning headline. Vance Imports embroiled in major tax scandal. CEO may face criminal charges. Hearing the door, Chloe's head snapped up. The moment she saw Ethan, she scrambled off the sofa as if he were her last hope, lunging at him and grabbing his arm, her nails digging into his flesh. Ethan, you have to help him. Please, I'm begging you, help Julian. Her voice was a hoarse, desperate sob, tears streaming down her face. His company is ruined. He's going to prison. I know it was you. It had to be you. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I ended it with him. I swear it's completely over. For the sake of all the years we've been together, please, just let him go. I'm begging you. She was hysterical, her body shaking with fear and desperation as she clung to his arm like a drowning woman. Ethan looked down at this woman, his wife, who was now weeping and pleading for another man. Her tears, her pleas, her terror. It was all so pathetic, so foul. He let her hold on, his body rigid, his expression a mask of glacial indifference. He waited until Chloe's SOBS had weakened, until her grip on his arm had loosened from exhaustion. Then, slowly, Ethan raised his other hand. He didn't push her away. Instead, with a delicate, almost mocking precision, he used 2 fingers to grasp her chin, forcing her tear-streaked face up to meet his emotionless eyes. He leaned in close, so close he could smell the salt of her tears. Then his lips curled upward in a smile, so cold it could freeze blood. His voice was a low, terrifying whisper, laced with a cruel, playful malice. "What's the rush?" he murmured, gently patting her cold cheek as one might soothe a disobedient pet. But his words were pure poison. This is just the beginning. Chloe's pupils dilated in sheer, unadulterated terror. Ethan's words were like an ice pick driven straight into her heart. Staring at the familiar yet terrifyingly alien face before her, she felt a chill shoot up from the soles of her feet, freezing the very blood in her veins. Ethan released her chin and, without another glance, walked toward the study as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture in his way. He left Chloe crumpled on the cold floor, shaking like a leaf in a storm, completely consumed by a tidal wave of annihilating fear. She knew, with horrifying certainty, that he wasn't joking. Julian's ruin was just the overture. Her own personal hell was only just beginning. The heavy wooden door of the study closed silently behind Ethan, shutting out the sound of Chloe's broken SOBS. The world was quiet again, leaving only the sound of his own steady breathing and the low hum of his computer. He sat down at the large desk, leaving the main lights off. The only illumination came from a single, cold white desk lamp, which carved his angular profile into sharp, hard lines. The absolute terror he had seen in Chloe's eyes was a high-octane fuel, feeding the icy flame of vengeance that burned within him. Destroying Julian wasn't nearly enough. He wanted Chloe to know what it felt like to be stripped of every protection, to be left naked and exposed to the contempt of the world. She would pay for her drunken confession 100 times over. Where to strike next? Ethan's gaze fell on an inconspicuous black flash drive sitting on the corner of his desk. It was a bonus gift from Spectre, included with the evidence against Julian, a crystal-clear, professionally cleaned audio file. He didn't know the source, but the content was a perfect recording of the party, capturing the moment Chloe drunkenly declared, "I cheated," with Julian Vance. The ensuing silence from their friends, the sound of the glass breaking. It was all there, as if happening in real time. A cold, clear plan formed in his mind. What did Chloe care about most? Besides her pathetic, doomed love affair, it was a respectable, traditional family who valued their reputation above all else. The Davis family owned a mid-sized construction supply company, and her father, Robert Davis, was an old-school, hidebound businessman obsessed with appearances. Ethan's fingertips tapped a steady rhythm on the cold surface of the desk, like the countdown to an execution. He opened a drawer and took out a new, unmarked manila envelope. He placed the flash drive containing the fatal recording inside. Then, he took a slip of paper and used his printer to type a single, emotionless line. Chloe's own words. "The proof is here. I trust you'll know what to do." No signature. None was needed. Her father would know exactly who it came from. The next morning, Ethan drove his car not to his office, but to an older, less secure industrial park on the other side of the city. Wearing a baseball cap and a mask, he parked in an obscure corner. A middle-aged man in a generic courier uniform, someone Leo had found through his network, was already waiting. Ethan handed him the manila envelope, his voice low. "This address. Priority overnight. No return address. Make sure it gets signed for by the receptionist or security and confirm it's delivered directly into Robert Davis's hands." "Got it, boss," the man said, taking the envelope and professionally sealing it in a courier pack. Ethan watched the courier's van disappear into traffic before starting his car again. He didn't need to see the look on Robert Davis's face when he received the package. He could imagine it perfectly. It was a precision-guided bomb aimed directly at the heart of the Davis family. The next few days passed with a semblance of normalcy. Ethan went to the office, attended meetings, and signed documents, though his presence was colder than ever. Chloe, meanwhile, had sunk into a near-catatonic state. She no longer tried to cook or speak. She moved through the empty apartment like a ghost, her face ashen, her eyes hollow and sunken. She seemed to be waiting for something, or perhaps she had already been crushed by the weight of her fear. Ethan waited patiently. On the third afternoon, his personal cell phone rang. The name on the screen was Robert Davis. Ethan watched it flash for a dozen rings before he calmly answered and put the phone to his ear, saying nothing. The sound from the other end was the heavy, ragged breathing of a cornered animal. After a few agonizing seconds, Robert Davis's voice came through, hoarse and trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Ethan, the package you sent. Is it real?" Ethan stood by the window, watching the endless stream of traffic below. His voice was calm, almost detached. "Robert, you've heard the recording on the drive. You can ask any of our friends who were there that night. They'll confirm it." Chloe said it herself, in front of everyone. He paused, then added, "Including me." "That damn!" A furious roar erupted from the phone, followed by the sound of something heavy smashing and a woman, Chloe's mother, crying out in alarm. Robert's bellow was so loud it nearly blew out the speaker. "That shameless tramp. She's dragged my name, the Davis name, through the mud. Our family. Our family." "Robert," Ethan cut through his tirade, his voice still level, but now carrying an undeniable, icy force. "When Chloe did this, she didn't just betray me. She threw your family's reputation on the ground and stomped on it. Do you really think your family should continue to support her? Or, for that matter, support the home that allowed this scandal to happen?" Dead silence on the other end. All Ethan could hear was Robert's heavy, wheezing breaths and his wife's muffled sobs. Ethan's words were a poisoned dagger, twisted precisely in Robert Davis's most vulnerable spot, his pride. After a long moment, Robert's voice returned, laced with exhaustion, rage, and the brutal finality of a man pushed to the edge. "Ethan, what? What do you want?" "It's very simple." Ethan's voice was as cold as the Arctic wind. "First, immediately cut off all funds to the secondary credit card you provide for Chloe. Second, All business and capital investments from Davis Construction Supplies to that little design studio she runs are to be terminated. Effective immediately. If she's got the nerve to find another man, she can find her own way to pay her bills. You're trying to destroy her. Chloe's mother shrieked, having apparently grabbed the phone. Destroy her? Ethan let out a cold, sharp laugh that was chilling even over the phone. Ma'am, when she stood up at a party, in front of me and all our friends, and proudly announced she was sleeping with another man, do you think she cared if she was destroying me? I'm simply asking her to take responsibility for her actions. Fine, fine, fine. Robert's voice was back, filled with a grim, broken resolve. Ethan, we don't have a daughter like that. We'll do as you say. From this day forward, whether she lives or dies is no longer any concern of the Davis family. She can carry her own damn shame. We won't be disgraced by her any longer. The line went dead. Ethan slowly lowered the phone, his face an unreadable mask. He knew the financial guillotine from the Davis family would fall on Chloe faster and harder than any court judgment. The very foundation of her comfortable life had just been yanked out from under her by the family she cared so much about. He walked to the bar, poured a glass of whiskey, and held the amber liquid up to the light, studying his own distorted reflection in the glass. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle, casting a cold, distant glow in his deep, dark eyes. Enjoy your new, independent life, Chloe. This is only the second cut. The real fun for you and your lover is just getting started. The financial blow from the Davis family came faster and more brutally than even Ethan had anticipated. That very same afternoon, Chloe's phone began to ring incessantly. First came a text alert from the bank, informing her that the credit card linked to her mother's primary account had been frozen. Immediately after, a frantic, tearful call came from the part-time bookkeeper at her small design studio. Chloe, it's a disaster, the Davis Company. They just sent a formal notice. They're canceling the next $50,000 capital injection they promised. And that new showroom project we were working on for them, they've terminated the contract. The general contractor just called screaming about breach of contract and damages. Chloe, our account. There's almost no money left. We can't even make payroll or rent next month. Chloe stood frozen, phone in hand, as the world spun around her. Her hands and feet went ice cold. She collapsed onto the floor, too stunned even to cry. Her father. He was really that cruel because of a recording? Ethan. He was ruthless. He was cutting off her air supply. She frantically dialed her parents. Her mother answered, but all Chloe could hear were muffled sobs and her father's furious roar in the background. Don't take her call. Tell her to get lost. The Davis family doesn't have a disgraceful daughter like her. The line was abruptly disconnected. When she tried to call back, it went straight to a busy signal. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. The studio was her last refuge, the one thing that proved her worth. Now it was gone, strangled by her own father. Panic and a crushing sense of isolation made her tremble. Money. She needed money to pay the breach of contract fees, to pay her employees' severance, to pay for her own life. The frozen credit card, once a source of casual extravagance, was now just a useless piece of plastic. She scrambled through her purse, found her own debit cards, and ran to the ATM downstairs. The balance on each was pitifully low. Combined, wasn't even enough to cover the studio's rent. The shadow of immense debt loomed over her, suffocating her. Just then, her phone rang again. It was an unknown local number. Desperate, Chloe answered it. Hello, am I speaking with Miss Chloe Davis? A man's voice asked, cool and detached. Why, yes, this is she. Who is this? Chloe asked, her voice trembling with a sliver of hope. This is Apex Financial Solutions. We understand your business, Gilded Lily Design, may be experiencing some short-term cash flow issues. Our firm provides fast, convenient financing services. The process is simple, and funds can be dispersed quickly. It's an ideal solution for a situation like yours. A loan shark. The words buzzed in Chloe's head. Her first instinct was to hang up, but the phrase funds can be dispersed quickly echoed in her ears like a siren's call. The contract penalty was a mountain crushing her. Her employee's salary. She couldn't just abandon them. And herself. With Ethan and her family cutting her off, she was almost broke. What's the interest rate? She heard her own dry voice ask, laced with a self-loathing humility. The man on the phone quoted an astronomically high figure, then added helpfully, "Ms. Davis, we are a legitimate firm, and our interest rates are within the legal limits. The bulk of the cost comes from our service and risk assessment fees. But don't worry, as long as you have collateral or a stable, alternative source of income, the loan amount won't be a problem." Alternative source of income. Her mind was a blank. Collateral. The only thing in her name was her aging sedan, which wasn't worth much. The apartment was Ethan's, purchased before their marriage. What did she have left? She thought of Julian, the man who had promised her a future. He was in his own world of trouble, but maybe he had some money stashed away. Maybe he could help her. After all, they were in this together. The thought took root and grew like a weed. Yes, Julian. He couldn't just abandon her. Clinging to this last sliver of hope, she ignored all sense of pride and found the number she had blocked and then secretly saved. She dialed it. The phone rang for a long time before someone picked up. Julian's voice was hoarse, exhausted, and dripping with raw irritation. "Who is this?" "Julian, it's me, Chloe," she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. There was a pause, then an explosion of rage. "Chloe, what the hell do you want now? Haven't you done enough damage to my life? Get lost. Don't you ever call me again." "Julian, please listen," she pleaded, the words tumbling out. "I'm ruined. My father cut me off. My studio is collapsing. I have to pay a huge penalty. I don't even have money for food. Please help me, for old time's sake, just lend me some money to get through this. I'll pay you back, I swear." "Lend you money?" Julian let out a hysterical, deranged laugh. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything. "Chloe, are you out of your goddamn mind? I'm bankrupt. My company's been seized. My car's been impounded. The bank is about to foreclose on my house. I'm up to my eyeballs in debt to loan sharks who are at my door every damn day. You're asking me for money? I was about to ask you for money to skip the country. Get lost. Go as far away as you can and never let me hear your voice again. You're a curse." "Julian, you can't do this, Before Chloe could finish, he hung up. The last flicker of hope was extinguished. Chloe stood on the busy sidewalk, clutching her phone, the world tilting and collapsing around her. The sun was bright, but she felt no warmth, only a bone-deep chill and a vast, empty despair. The loan officer's words echoed in her ears. She looked at the number on her screen, her finger trembling. Finally, crushed by the weight of survival and the terror of having nowhere else to turn, she gritted her teeth and dialed it back. "Hello, Apex Financial. I'd like to inquire about the application process for a loan." Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with humiliation and defeat. She knew it was poison, but she was dying of thirst, and she had no other choice. Ethan's second cut had severed her last lifeline, pushing her to the edge of a cliff. The abyss was staring back at her. Gilded Lily design, stripped of its primary funding and key projects, collapsed almost overnight. The money from Apex Financial was a temporary fix that came with a much deeper burn. The exorbitant interest rates were like a ravenous parasite, devouring the principal loan amount daily. After paying her employees' severance and the loan's massive upfront service fees, there was almost nothing left. The collection calls began, coming at all hours of the day and night. They started as polite reminders and quickly escalated to crude threats and verbal abuse. Chloe stopped going home, terrified the collectors would show up there, and even more terrified of facing Ethan's all-knowing, ice-cold stare. She hid out in her now-defunct studio, a nervous wreck. She drew all the blinds, curled up on a dusty sofa in the corner, and watched her phone screen light up with blocked numbers and menacing texts, her body shaking uncontrollably. The studio was no longer her dream. It was her prison, a cage she feared would be stormed at any moment. That afternoon, the dreaded banging was no longer just in her head. It was real, loud, and malicious, rattling the studio's glass front door. Bang, bang, bang. "Chloe Davis, open the damn door. We know you're in there. Stop playing dead," a gruff voice yelled from outside. Chloe was paralyzed with fear, clamping a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. She shrank into the sofa, wishing she could disappear. "Not opening up? Huh. Fine, we got other ways," the man outside sneered. Then came the sickening sound of a key fumbling in the lock, followed by the screech of metal tools prying at the doorframe. They had a key, or they were picking the lock. "No, don't come in," Chloe finally shrieked, her terror overriding her silence. Crash! The lock broke, and the door was thrown open, slamming against the wall. 3 burly men in loud shirts and covered in ugly tattoos stormed in. The leader, a bald man with cruel eyes, scanned the room and immediately fixed his gaze on Chloe, cowering in the corner. Well, look what we have here. Hiding out. Are we, Ms. Designer? The bald man said, his lips twisting into a grin that revealed yellowed teeth as he advanced on her. "The money. I'll pay it back. Just give me more time, please," Chloe cried, her voice trembling violently. "Time," he scoffed, kicking over a stand holding a plaster sculpture, which shattered on the floor. "I give you time. Who gives me time? You either pay up today, principal and interest, or—" His leering eyes roamed up and down her body. "Or we do things the hard way." The 2 thugs behind him chuckled menacingly and began to circle her. "No, stay away," Chloe screamed, scrambling backward. She desperately grabbed a heavy brass paperweight from a nearby table and waved it wildly. "I'll call the cops. I'm calling the cops." "The cops." The bald man laughed as if it were the funniest joke he'd ever heard. He lunged forward, slapping the paperweight out of her hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud. His rough hand clamped around her wrist like a vice, and he yanked her off the sofa, throwing her to the ground. "Ah!" Chloe cried out in pain. Another one of the thugs grabbed a fistful of her hair, pulling her head back. "You deadbeat bitch! Think you can get away with not paying?" the bald man growled. He squatted down and slapped her tear-streaked face, his calloused hand stinging her skin. "Call the cops? Go ahead. Let's see who they arrest. Paying your debts is the law of the land." "Boss, why waste time talking? Looks like she's got some nice stuff in here. Let's take some of it as a down payment," one of the others said, already moving toward her high-end computer. "No, that's my work computer." Chloe sobbed, struggling. "Work? You think you're in any position to work?" the leader spat. He yanked her by the hair and threw her aside. Her forehead slammed into the corner of the coffee table, and stars exploded behind her eyes. "Take it. Take anything that looks valuable," the bald man ordered. The computer, the professional-grade printer, the scanner, even a few expensive-looking office chairs. Everything of value was ripped out and carried away. Chloe lay on the floor, her forehead bleeding, her hair a mess, her clothes torn. She watched as everything she had built was destroyed and stolen, too numb with despair and pain even to cry. "This is your lucky day, Chloe," the bald man said before leaving. He kicked her limp form lightly. "This junk won't cover much. You got 3 days. 3 more days. If we don't see our money, it won't be just the 3 of us next time. And we won't be here to move furniture. You understand me?" The 3 thugs hauled their loot out the door and were gone, leaving behind a scene of total devastation and Chloe, bruised and bleeding, shivering on the cold floor. The studio door hung open like a gaping, mocking mouth. A cold wind blew in, scattering loose papers across the floor. She was finished, completely and utterly finished. No money, no family. Ethan, the man behind it all, watching from the shadows as she descended into hell. And Julian, the man she had once trusted, now saw her as a plague and was fighting for his own survival. Cold, absolute despair coiled around her heart like a python, squeezing tighter and tighter. She stared up at the ceiling, her eyes empty and gray. Ethan's second cut had not only severed her financial lifeline, but had also pushed her into a pit of violence and terror. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, this was not the end. Julian's life was even worse than Chloe's. The IRS fines and penalties had completely crushed his company. His assets were frozen, and his bank accounts locked. And the loan sharks he had borrowed from years ago to expand his business were now closing in, the interest having ballooned into a monstrous, soul-crushing sum. The collectors had moved beyond phone calls to direct, violent action. His Porsche was found one morning with its windows smashed and tires slashed. His front door was splattered with red paint, with the words "pay up" and "or else" scrawled across it. He was too afraid to go home, moving from one cheap, moldy motel to another, a rat hiding in the city's grimy underbelly. The once dapper Julian Vance was now a gaunt, bearded mess, his designer suits stained and wrinkled. One evening, he slipped into a seedy internet cafe to check on the last of his emergency funds, which he had stashed in an offshore account. He had just sat down when his burner phone vibrated. It was a blocked number. He looked around nervously before answering, his voice a low whisper. "Yeah, Julian Vance?" The voice on the other end was a distorted, genderless electronic tone. "Who is this?" Julian's heart plummeted. "Who I am isn't important," the voice droned. "What's important is that I know about your little nest egg. The one in that private Swiss bank, Alpine Guardian. Account ending in about 1.2 million euros, isn't it? Oh, and it's held under your cousin's name, William Chun." The blood drained from Julian's face. That was his escape fund, his last resort. Not even his most trusted accountant knew about it. How could this person possibly know? He looked around the dim cafe, every shadow seeming to hold a pair of watching eyes. What? What do you want?" Julian's voice was high-pitched with terror. "It's simple," the electronic voice continued. "Chloe Davis owes a company called Apex Financial about $80,000, principal and interest. They're about to tear her apart. You're going to pay it for her." "What?" Julian shot up from his chair, his screech of disbelief turning the heads of a few gamers nearby. He clamped a hand over the phone, hunched over, and hissed into it, his voice a torrent of incredulous rage. "Are you insane? You wanted to pay for her? Hasn't that bitch ruined my life enough? I'm fighting for my own survival. I don't have a dime. That money is my lifeline." "Is that so?" the voice replied, devoid of emotion but radiating absolute control. "Then I suppose you won't mind when the Swiss banking authorities and the IRS both receive a detailed report tomorrow morning about your illegal transfer of assets and suspected money laundering. By the way, I also have comprehensive proof of your cousin William's role in helping you. How long do you think he'll cover for you when he's facing federal charges?" Julian froze, feeling as if he'd been struck by lightning. Cold sweat drenched his shirt. They knew everything. If this got out, he wouldn't just lose the money. He'd be facing even more serious charges. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison. The icy grip of fear tightened around his throat, choking him. He gasped for air, his eyes bloodshot with rage and terror. "Who are you?" "It's Ethan Hayes, isn't it? It has to be." Julian snarled. "Who I am doesn't matter," the voice repeated. "What matters is your choice. Pay Chloe's debt and keep your nest egg and your freedom. Or we can burn it all down, and you can go to prison for a very long time. You have 3 minutes to decide." A rhythmic tick-tock sound started on the other end of the line, each tick a hammer blow to Julian's sanity. On one hand was the woman he now despised more than anyone on earth. On the other was his only chance at survival. The seconds crawled by. The muscles in Julian's face twitched uncontrollably. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging them. He clenched his fists so hard that his nails broke the skin. Finally, just as the ticking was about to stop, a guttural, animalistic roar of pure humiliation and rage tore from his throat. "The account. Give me the damn account number for the loan." The electronic voice on the other end seemed to emit a soft hum of satisfaction before reciting a string of numbers. "Once the money is transferred, your problems will disappear. And remember, don't try anything clever. I'm watching everything." The line went dead. Julian collapsed back into the sticky chair, his body limp. He was shaking, his mind a vortex of fury and shame. With trembling hands, he logged into his secret account. Staring at the number that represented his last hope, he gritted his teeth, typed in the account number for Apex Financial, and transferred $80,000. The moment the transfer was confirmed, he slammed his fist into the cheap keyboard, sending plastic keys flying. "Chloe, you goddamn worthless jinx," he hissed through clenched teeth, his eyes red with a murderous hatred. That debt, the debt he was forced to pay for her, was the final straw. All of his rage, which had been directed at the mysterious caller he assumed was Ethan, now surged toward Chloe. He had to find her. He had to make her pay. He was going to tear her apart with his bare hands. The cornered, wounded animal was now turning its fangs on its former partner in crime. Chloe was curled up on the cold floor of her ruined studio, a crust of dried blood on her forehead. The loan shark's 3-day deadline loomed over her like a guillotine. Just as she was sinking into a numb despair, her phone buzzed with a text message. Central Bank, your account ending in received a deposit of $80,000 on October 14. Your new balance is $80,000. Chloe shot upright, the sudden movement sending a jolt of pain through her head, but she barely noticed. She stared at the message, reading it over and over, convinced she was hallucinating. 80,000, the exact amount she owed Apex Financial. Who? Who had paid it? Her parents? Impossible. Ethan. He wanted her to suffer, not save her. It had to be Julian. Her heart leaped. Yes, despite his words, he must still care. He must have found a way to get the money to save her. A wave of relief and a twisted sense of gratitude washed over her. She immediately found his number and called. This time, he picked up almost instantly. Hello. Julian, was it you, the money? Did you? Chloe's voice was thick with tears of relief. The other end was silent, except for the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. Julian, say something. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. Shut up. Julian's voice, raw and savage, ripped through the phone like a predator's roar. Chloe, where the hell are you right now? The venom in his voice sent a chill down her spine, and her relief vanished. I'm at the studio. Julian, what's wrong? Stay right there. Don't move. I'm coming for you, he snarled, then hung up. Chloe's heart sank. His tone, it wasn't that of a savior. It was filled with a terrifying hatred. She wanted to run, but she was frozen with fear. Moments later, she heard the screech of tires outside, followed by the slam of a car door. Boom! The broken studio door was kicked open, slamming against the wall and shattering the remaining glass. Julian burst in like a madman. His eyes were bloodshot, his face was a mask of feral rage, and he reeked of cheap whiskey. In his hand, he was clutching an empty liquor bottle. Chloe, you bitch, you curse, he roared, spotting her on the floor and charging toward her. Julian, what are you doing? You're drunk, she screamed, scrambling backward. What am I doing? He loomed over her, his eyes wild. He raised the bottle as if to strike, and she flinched, screaming. I'm going to kill you. $80,000. That was the last of my money, my escape money, and it all went down the drain to save your worthless hide. He was spitting with rage. If it wasn't for you, for your big mouth at that party, would Hayes have come after me? Well, I've lost everything. My company, my car, my house, all gone, and now my last chance to get away is gone too. It's all because of you. No, that's not true. She sobbed. The hell it isn't. He smashed the bottle on the floor next to her, showering her with glass. It's your fault. If you hadn't thrown yourself at me, if you weren't so desperate for attention, I never would have touched you. You brought this on us. You ruined me. The outrageous, blame-shifting accusation snapped something inside Chloe. Her own rage surged past her fear. You're blaming me? She shrieked, her voice raw with fury. You have no shame. Who was the one sending me flirty texts? Who was the one who wouldn't leave me alone at that holiday party? You're the one who started this, you pathetic coward. You're a leech, and now that you're in trouble, you're trying to pin it all on me. You're human garbage. You shut your mouth. Her words hit a nerve, and he lunged, grabbing the front of her shirt and hauling her to her feet. You were easy. You couldn't wait to spread your legs because your husband wasn't giving you enough attention. If you had just kept your damn mouth shut, none of this would have happened. It's all your fault, you stupid, useless bitch. He shook her violently, like a rag doll. Let go of me, she screamed, clawing at his arms, drawing blood. He yelped in pain, his rage boiling over. With a final, furious shove, he threw her away from him. Chloe stumbled backward, her foot landing on a piece of broken glass. She lost her balance and fell, a sharp cry tearing from her lips as her lower back slammed into the pointed corner of a metal desk. An unearthly, agonizing scream ripped from her throat. An explosion of pain radiated through her entire body. Her vision went black, and she collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing in agony. A dark, wet patch began to spread on the floor beneath her. Julian froze, the drunken fury in his eyes replaced by a flicker of panic. He saw the twisted pain on her face and the growing pool of blood. Stop faking it, he stammered, his voice losing its conviction. The sight of the blood, so much blood, sobered him instantly. Assault? Manslaughter? Damn it, you curse, he muttered. He turned and fled, scrambling out of the ruined studio like a terrified animal, leaving Chloe alone on the floor, twitching in a spreading pool of her own blood. In the darkened study of the penthouse apartment, Ethan Hayes sat alone. The only light came from the 3 large computer monitors on his desk, their glow casting a pale, bluish light on his cold, stone-like face. The screens were split into a multi-view display, showing crystal-clear footage from hidden cameras inside Chloe's studio. He had watched it all. Julian's violent entrance, their venomous, hate-filled accusations, the brutal shove, the sickening impact against the desk, Chloe's agonizing collapse, the spreading pool of blood, Julian's panicked, cowardly escape. Ethan's eyes moved slowly from one screen to the next, taking in every detail with an unnerving calm. He watched the final, pathetic act of their drama play out, a drama he had scripted and directed from the shadows. A profound, almost serene stillness settled over him. The tension that had held his body rigid for weeks finally released. He leaned back into the plush leather of his chair. With a slow, deliberate motion, he took a cigarette from the box on his desk. Click! The soft sound of his silver lighter echoed in the silent room. He took a long, deep drag, the smoke filling his lungs, and then exhaled it slowly. The gray smoke curled in the blue light of the monitors, twisting and writhing before finally disappearing into the darkness above. His gaze was fixed on the screen, on the frozen image of the blood-soaked floor and Julian's fleeing shadow. There was no triumphant laughter, no cathartic release. There was only a deep, abiding, and utterly cold sense of peace. It was the calm that comes after a volcano has erupted, leaving behind only hard, cold, unfeeling stone. He took another drag from his cigarette. Then he reached out a single finger and lightly tapped the main screen. The monitors all went black. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the distant, indifferent city lights outside the window and the single red cherry of the cigarette, glowing and fading in the thick, silent dark. So, damn, satisfying.